Before you can create a healthy relationship with others, you first have to create a healthy relationship with yourself. Welcome to Let's Talk About It with your host, Dr. Janie Lacy. Janie is a nationally respected psychotherapist, and on this show, she and her featured guests will help you discover and break patterns in your life that can contribute to self-sabotage and unhealthy relationships. Now, here is Dr. Janie Lacy.
Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About It with Janie Lacy. You know, toxic thoughts, depression, anxiety, our mental mess is frequently aggravated by a chaotic world and sustained by an inability to manage our own thought life. Our guest today, Dr. Caroline Leaf, says that we shouldn't settle until this mental mess as if it's normal. She's here today to let you know that there is hope and help available to us, and the road to healthier thoughts and peak happiness may actually be shorter than you think. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the show Dr. Caroline Leaf, who is here to help you to start cleaning up your mental mess that may be the key to unlocking a more peaceful life. Dr. Caroline Leaf is a communication pathologist and neuroscientist whose passion is to help people see the power of the mind to change the brain and to control chaotic thinking. We all can use that, and to find mental peace. She's the author of Switch On Your Brain, Think and Eat Yourself Smart, The Perfect You, and Think, Learn, Succeed, among many other books. Her top-rated podcast, Cleaning Up the Mental Mess, and countless media appearances. Welcome to the show, Dr. Leaf.
Thank you so much. It's so lovely to be with you, Janie.
And we are so happy that you are here. You know, when reading your book, there's so much information that we all can glean from just to have a healthier life. But, you know, one of the things that stood out to me, and I have to start off right with this, you know, you talk about forgetting a past hurt or trauma is impossible, even with forgiveness. And we can't just erase traumatic events from our memory as they impact our brain and are stored in our bodies. But we can, however, change how it is stored and how the past impacts the present. And we constantly hear this, you know, forgive and forget. I know my clients are always telling this to themselves, forgive and forget. Yeah. So please help us. You have to start us off by helping us understand, why can't we just forgive and forget?
I love that you asked that question, you know, and that's great that you did. I recently did a podcast on that, and it's just so important because there's such a philosophy out there, and a lot of it's coming from the wellness movement plus the religious movement, and it's all well-intentioned. And it's thinking, well, if I've forgiven, I can just forget. But that's not enough. You've got to forgive. That's part of the healing process. That's just one of the steps. But you can't just forget what's happened to you, because forgetting in that sense, where you say, okay, well, now I've forgiven, that's it. You haven't done the processing yet, and you haven't stored out the actual source cause, the origin story. You haven't worked through, you haven't deconstructed and reconstructed why you were at that place. So if you do just try and forget, what you're really doing is you're just suppressing. You're just pushing it down into the depths of your mind and your brain and your body. And that's volcanic in nature. A thought with its memories embedded is volcanic in nature. So it doesn't respond very well to suppression. Suppression, you know, you can't, eventually that volcano bubbles over and causes damage. And that is what a thought does if we try and forget. So I think maybe, Janie, a really good way to understand this is if I explain what the mind is, what the brain is, and what a thought is. Because if people understand, you know, we can talk in general terms about, you know, not suppressing, but what does it actually look like? What does it mean it's stored in my brain and my body? What is the brain? What is the mind? I think those distinctions are very important to help people understand why you can't just forget and why you shouldn't try and just forget. Because what you've got to do is not forget, you've got to actually reconceptualize. And it's two totally different processes. Forgetting is suppression. Reconceptualizing is actually accepting it, reworking it, and making it work for you instead of against you. So you get the control, you shift the power balance. And that's the pathway to empowerment. So that's kind of the philosophy behind it. But I don't know if you'd like me to dive a little deeper into the more sciencey, physical side of it, because it's quite fascinating. And when people recognize the power, what a thought actually is, it's much easier to do what we're saying.
Absolutely. And Dr. Leaf, I think it actually would be very helpful if you were to break it down. Because I think a lot of times people are, you know, I know with my different groups and different clients that I work with, it's intimidating when people hear certain language, when they hear certain words, if they can't relate to it or they don't know what it is. So then they'll think, well, that doesn't relate to me. And then they don't explore it. So it would be phenomenal if you were able to help us break down some of the science of the mind and the brain, so people have a reference point as to why this is important.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with you. We throw a lot of words around that, almost interchangeably. Like people will use mind and brain as though they're the same thing, and they'll use thoughts and memories as though they're the same thing, and they'll use emotions and feelings as though they're the same thing. But all these things are actually different, and they play different roles and that kind of thing. And when you understand kind of what they are, you've got knowledge. And when you've got knowledge, you find that you can change your attitude. And when you change your attitude, you actually then can apply the skill. You can develop it. It can become a behavior change. And so that's always what I try and teach people, is to try and give them the knowledge to be able to shift attitude and then change behaviors. So in terms of that, I know you've got viewers and listeners. So the listeners, I'm going to use some props if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
And then I'll describe them to the listeners. So the first thing I'm holding up here for those of you that are listening is a brain, not a real one. It's a model of a brain in a skull. And the reason I'm starting here with this prop is that the brain is not the mind. So you'll be looking at a brain, your brain's in your skull, but that is not what your mind is. These are two very distinct concepts and two very distinct things. And if we can understand the difference, which I'm going to explain now, it is a huge step in the direction of not just forgetting, but reconceptualizing and getting control over the thought life and all the things that we're going to be discussing today, cleaning up a mental mess, etc. So the brain is basically the physical part of us. It's part of the body. So I'm holding up another model, and that's of the brain and the body. And you could just look at your own body if you are listening. And that is the physical part of you. Now, interestingly enough, this brain, body, physical part of us, which is so vitally important, is only actually about 1, maybe 10% of who you are as a human. So what's the other 90 to 99%? It's your mind. So your mind is this massive, huge part of you, which is why it's such an important part to understand, and which is something that we don't spend enough time talking about in this current era. 40 years ago, it was much more talked about. And and right back into the ancient times, there's 150 years of very good scientific, solid, and modern scientific research on mind and mind-brain connection. But for the last 40 years, we've gone forward in so many ways, but we've gone backward as well in so many ways, and we're paying a massive price. And I talk about that, Janie, in the first part of my book, about the price of not understanding mind, and the overarching result of us not understanding the mind-brain difference, the mind being this 90 to 99% of us, and the brain being this part of the 1 to 10% physical brain and body, is that we are not treating people as humans. We're subsuming the mental capacity of humans onto the physical capacity as though they're one, and they're not, they're separate. And that is called what we call the biomedical model. So for example, that would be saying that if someone is battling with depression, they have a chemical imbalance. Now that is a myth, it's unscientific. It's not even spoken about in anyone who's worth any kind of scientist who understands what they're talking about, and doctor, medical person, psychotherapist, etc. won't talk about that, because that is old science. It's a very good marketing strategy, but what it is an example of how we've subsumed the mental capacity, that 90 to 99% of who we are as humans, that mind part of us, into the physical substance of the brain and the body. So like if someone's got diabetes or cancer, we can identify that through very good medical procedures. That's the biomedical model, and there's treatment, and it's fantastic, and we've advanced so much in the last 40 years and technology, and that's been amazing. But what's happened is that when people are battling with, for example, depression or anxiety, ruminating, panic attacks, bipolar, all those scary words, instead of those being descriptions of clues and warning signals of what's going on in a person's life, that they're reflecting a narrative, that is pushed aside, and it's subsumed into the physical, and now it's spoken of as though it's a physical disease, as though there's a neuropsychiatric brain disease, or there's a neurobiological correlate in your brain for what's happening, or that you're a broken brain. And that's really quite demoralizing and quite invalidating, because and it increases the stigma, because already you're battling with whatever you're going through, the pandemic, loss, death, grieving, financial, just life, the things that happen, and now you get told on top of that your feelings of depression or anxiety as a result of what you're going through, you now get told it's a disease, that you now not only are battling, but you also have a brain disease, which is really scary. It takes hope, it takes control away, it takes hope away. And what we see from between 1996 and 2014, there was a trend being picked up, and they watched this, and federal data show, we did this long study, and it's not spoken about much, and that's why I speak about it all the time and I put it into my book. But it's a very, very important study because it reflects the dangers of ignoring the 90 to 99% mind. So what's happened is, in ignoring that and going and subsuming it under the physical, or making it all about the physical, and forgetting about you and being a human in life, experiencing adverse circumstances and having a source and an origin story to what you're going through, ignoring all of that has resulted in people dying 8 to 25 years younger than what they should, which is insane. So we've advanced with neuroscience, we've advanced with technology, we've advanced with medicine. You would think that the decades-long trend of people living longer would still be in effect, but it's not. So for decades, people have been living longer because of those advances. But now, since between 96 and 2014, and the trend has continued into 2021, the people are actually, the trend is reversed. So people are now dying younger. So there's a very, 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 very important consequence of not managing our mind, of not understanding mind, of keeping this distinction in place and understanding the relationship. And that is, if we don't, people pretty much are dying younger, and that's frightening. And the age group most affected, Janie, is the 25 to 64-year-old. So that's, kids are losing parents, and the workplace is losing workers in their prime. And so we've got, and we also have our millennials, Gen Z, Gen Y, and Gen Z having are the most drug generation ever, especially Gen Z are the most drug generation ever. So those are very significant factors, because drugs do change the brain. Psychotropic drugs specifically change the brain. They're not fixing anything, they're having an effect in the brain, and that effect changes the brain. And that effect, it's not even a side effect, it's direct effects that can also shorten lifespan. So these are things that are not being spoken about enough. And I know that I understand your approach, and I understand you and I have the same philosophy and approach, and thank goodness that we're both out there and there's a lot of us like us talking about this. So I want to come back full circle and say it's so important that we do understand that when we talk about your brain, your depression, anxiety, etc., not being a brain disease, we're not invalidating, we're actually validating. We are saying it's much more than a brain disease. It's not a brain disease. You can't just go and label it and stick it in a box and say that's it for the rest of your life, take medication. That's not the case. As you as a psychotherapist know, what we have to do is we have to go and understand why we have that. So I come from the angle that you look at the depression and the anxiety as a cue, as a warning signal, as a clue, a warning signal, a messenger, helpful. And when you embrace those, you can then process, find the source, and reconceptualize. And that's the basics. So that's been the overarching philosophy and direction of my research for nearly 40 years now. So I've been in the field 40 years, 38 years, and I have been doing clinical trials and research for that amount of time. And I've practiced clinically for 25 years. So, and I don't do it in a lab. I don't do my work in a lab. I go out into the field and work with people in real life, which I think is more significant because it's not creating situations. It's actually looking at what's happening in a person's life. So having said all of that, let's come back to the brain-mind difference. You've got the brain and the body, which is 1 to 10% of who you are. And that's the biomedical model is brilliant for that. Absolutely wonderful. Then we have our mind. So what is our mind? At 90 to 99% is mind, is our aliveness. So the difference between you and me having this conversation and the listeners and viewers and a dead person is our mind. So the mind is this life force. It's this energizing life force that enables us to experience life, the absolute gift of experiencing life. So our mind is how we experience life from the moment we open our eyes to the moment we go to sleep. And then while we're sleeping, our mind is still working to sort out what we've just experienced during the day. So the mind never stops. We can go 3 weeks without food. We can go 3 days without water. We can go 3 minutes without oxygen, but we don't even go 3 seconds without using the mind. So if you define mind in the most simple terms, mind is how you think, how you feel, and how you choose. Now notice I've held the 3 fingers up together and they stuck together, literally. Thinking, feeling, choosing. That is what mind is. You can't think without feeling. You can't think and feel without choosing. You can't feel without choosing and thinking. In other words, they're always working together. You will experience life. And as soon as you have an experience, you open your eyes, you read your cell phone, or you talk to someone, or you start thinking about the day. That is you experiencing life. You start thinking. As soon as you start thinking, you have feelings. As soon as you have feelings, you make choices. So you're doing this little cycle, which is mind, this mind cycle, this mind in action cycle, all day long and all night long at around about 400 billion actions per second. And that's how we process the experience of life. You're doing it right now as you're listening to me and watching the props and seeing the visuals and so on, is you are processing everything that I'm saying at 400 billion actions per second to think, feel, choose, think, feel, choose, think, feel, choose. So that's on a psychological level. Interestingly, on a physics level, we can also look at mind. So body, we can understand neurobiology, but around the body, we have this, imagine a cloud around the body. And that cloud is literally a gravitational field. Now, that's not anything weird. If you think of it, we're sitting, we're not floating. That's because of gravity. We are in gravitational fields. A couple of years back, Nobel Prize winners won the Nobel Prize for their work on gravitational fields and how you can start measuring them. And some of the work that's coming out is that each human has their own unique gravitational field. And like I can't have yours, you can't have mine. And that field moves through the brain and the body. And that field has got a lot to do with the work of Einstein, the photoelectric effect, the work of quantum physics. So it's stuff that we've actually been studying for 150 years, but it's not spoken about in mainstream science much. It's also something that the ancients spoke about. Mind and brain were always seen as a separation. So this is ancient and modern science coming together in the fields of like gravitational fields and that kind of thing. So quite simply, in an easy, simple language, imagine a cloud around you, and it's this whole electromagnetic field, and it's also through you. Now, how do we see that? You can do an EKG on someone's heart, and you will pick up electrical activity. That's evidence of mind moving through brain and body. You can do a QEEG, which is the technology I use as a neuroscientist, and that picks up the energy response, the electrical activity in the brain. You can do various different types of tests to check electrical activity in the blood flow, and so on and so on. So in other words, you can do an fMRI. If someone's dead, those machines, that technology is not going to have any response. So the response is this energetic mind thing. Now, the exciting thing is that this mind is how we are processing information. So when I said that you are processing what you are hearing and thinking and feel, what you're hearing us discuss now, that means you're processing. The little machine is your think, feel, choose, think, feel, choose, think, feel, choose, think, feel, choose. On a physics level, it's a bunch of electromagnetic effects and gravitational fields and all kind of being pushed through the brain. Then the brain then responds electrically, electromagnetically, electrochemically, and using quantum energy, as well as genetically. And that whole beautiful relationship between the think, feel, choose, gravitational, all this physics stuff, and the physical and the contact with the physical substance of the brain creates a genetic response. And the genetic response makes substance, real stuff, proteins. And those proteins group together, what makes amino acids, and amino acids group together to form proteins, and proteins group together to form little branches. And each protein is holding the words as a vibration. So proteins are substance, so they have weight. Groups of proteins have more weight. The proteins have got vibrations inside of them, which is the content, which is more weight. So what I'm talking about is you actually building a thought made of branches, and these a thought that has branches made of proteins and chemicals. So now I'm holding up a little tree, and this tree is what thoughts look like in the brain. They literally look like branch trees. So as a tree, I'm holding up a tree, a little green tree in a pot, and the roots obviously would be buried inside the pot, but the roots would be a whole lot of roots. So first of all, roots grow, we know that, and then the branches grow. So this is now a thought. So the substance or the product of think, feel, choose is you build thoughts. So when I talk about you hearing what I'm saying, you think, feel, choose, all that physics stuff's happen, goes in your brain responds in all these chemical and electrical ways, and suddenly you have this genetic response, and you make amino acids, you make proteins, you grow branches. Here are the branches. So each of these little branches is made of proteins. Each protein is vibrating. So there's millions of trillions in this little tree. So as I'm talking now, you are doing this. You are directing neuroplasticity. Neuro means brain, plastic means to change. You're growing your brain. You're changing the structure of your brain. You're creating a product that is a thought that has weight. It has substance, and it therefore has impact on you physically in your brain and in your body, which is phenomenal. Now, the structure of this, so this is a thought. Okay, the whole tree. And this is a thought. Now, let's say the thought we're building at the moment is about this conversation. So we're talking about mental health, or we're talking about mind, brain, or however you've pitched this in your mind, however you see this conversation. So that would be the name of your tree. Like you have an apple tree, and you have a fir tree, and you have a whatever. This is a thought tree. So that it has a name, it's a concept, but it's made of branches, like a tree's made of branches above the ground and root branches. And those branches are the memories. So like a tree is made of branches, thoughts, which are real things, are made of memories. So memories are inside the thoughts. And these memories are very full. So now the roots are the source. So in other words, what I'm saying, the questions you ask me, my answers, the discussion, the back and forth between you and I is the source, because this is the origin of today's tree. And the tree trunk and the branches, each person that's listening is building the roots. That's the source. But the branches that you see above the ground, those are your interpretation, your perception, your unique view of what you're hearing, of what you're experiencing. So you grow your experience. So this is what you think, feel, and choose about what you're hearing. So this is very real. This has weight. This has impact. Now, the more I think about this, the more energy I give it, the more weight it becomes. Now, this produces behavior. What you say and what you do, how you turn up in your relationships, how you turn up in work, how you turn up in your life with your spouses, with your loved ones, with your kids, with your work colleagues, with how you turn up in what you do with how you do your work, etc. Everything about what you say and do is coming from these that you build. Now, this is a healthy tree, a healthy thought tree. Here's now my famous toxic tree. So I've got a wiry tree. It is very much alive, but it doesn't look alive. So this is now the same sort of structure. So there's my root system, there's the tree trunk, and there are the branches. But now this would be a toxic experience, like a trauma, like an abuse, like experiencing what you have through COVID, and the acute trauma that initially that became a pretty established trauma over the last 14 months, and all the experiences that you've uniquely had around that. So that's the actual experience. All the information about COVID, for example, would be in the roots, and each day more is being added, and then this is your interpretation of that. Now this is toxic, so therefore these proteins are still got substance, still made of proteins, but these proteins fold incorrectly, because this is now a toxic, it's a misperceived view, it's something that's damaging, it's an adverse circumstance that you're experiencing, so it's distorted, so it builds into your brain as this solid reality. So this, because it's toxic, our brain and our body, we know from neurobiology, are wired for love, for health, for survival. So therefore this threatens survival, very much like the COVID virus threatens survival. So when you do get the COVID virus, your immune system responds to fight it. When you have a toxic thought, it's as real physically as I've just described as a virus. So therefore your immune system starts fighting this. And I showed this in my research. You're going to get an increase in cortisol. You're going to get an increase in homocysteine, you're going to get an increase in inflammatory factors, it's going to affect your DNA. So all of this is why we get these reactions to stress, why our body becomes inflamed, why we get vulnerability in the different systems of our body when we try and keep these things. So this goes full circle back to the first question of why you can't forget. If someone has hurt you, there's the source, there's your interpretation. This is now manifesting in how you're showing up. Perhaps it was a repeated abuse in a marriage. So now there's this total this now shows up in your behaviors of being timid, of being lacking in self-confidence, fearful of forming new relationships, lacking in trust, very unhappy, a lot of depression. That's going to show up in your life. So you can't just say, okay, I forgive my ex for an ex for bullying, or you forgive that parent for abuse, or you forgive that perpetrator for abuse, or whatever. That's part of. But if you just do that and then shove this down, you haven't dealt with this. This is alive and living. This threatens survival. Your immune system's still saying, hey, there's a threat to your survival. So you still have increased inflammation and increased, or every system right down to every cell of your body is being affected, because not only is this stored in your brain as a tree, so this is in and I'm holding up a toxic tree that's all wiry, and I'm holding up the brain, but this is also, remember, the gravitational field of the mind. This is also, in a second place, it's in the fields of the mind. So instead of there being waves, looking beautiful waves like the waves of the sea, it becomes this very jagged line that is creating tremendous anxiety and stress. So we get that in our field, which then moves to our body. So we get this and that make you having anxiety, and it can increase and cumulatively over time lead to higher levels of anxiety and panic. And that's not a disease, that is a response. And yes, it is damaging the brain and the body. Yes, we will see changes. As I said, your inflammation will increase because cortisol will rise, glucose levels will rise, homocysteine, prolactin, ACTH, all these factors we see that are biomarkers of illness will rise, and then our systems start breaking down, our heart and our lungs and our liver and our digestive system, whatever. We've all got genetic weaknesses, and we're all going to respond differently. So unmanaged, just for suppressing, pushing down, not dealing with stuff, has increased this is still here. When this is still here, you increase the vulnerability of your brain and body to disease. So I'm not saying that unforgiveness causes cancer. Absolutely not. I'm also not saying what the secret says is that I can just wish something nice and it attracts me. And that's so ridiculously shallow. It's not how humans function. I'm also not just saying think positive thoughts and say 10 gratitude statements and 15 affirmations and everything's good. No, that's a band-aid on a bullet wound, as one of my friends says. That's not doing anything. What you have to do, those you can use those at a certain point. It's even like CBT techniques. I mean, you're a psychotherapist, you can't just throw in a technique. You have to find out what's going on first. The technique is then used in the repair process, but you first have to deconstruct. And that's what we need to help people to do. So you can increase vulnerability in your body by trying to just shove down, by just trying to forget, by not dealing with our stuff, by just pretending it's not there, or just accepting that label and just living in the depression. You are actually increasing your vulnerability to disease by 35 to 98%. So how can you reverse this? What can you do? How do you forgive and not forget? What do? You have to manage your mind. You have to bring in mind management, which requires self-regulation, which requires understanding that mind has got two components, messy mind and wise mind. But before I dive into that, I don't know if you want to ask me anything about what I've just said.
Dr. Leaf, I think you set somebody free, and I just feel like shouting because the way that you expressed and shared with us, I think it's going to help a lot of people understand when people think they're defective and there's something wrong with them, or they get into this victim mentality. So we are going to take our commercial break, and we will be right back with Dr. Leaf because we have a lot more in store for you. So we'll be right back. Let's talk about it with Janie Lacy.
Are you often attracted to unavailable partners? Feel like you can't stay but can't leave a toxic relationship? Obsessed with thinking about a current or former lover? Feel resentful that you're always taking care of the other person? The Woman Redeemed Therapy Program is for women who want to break free from toxic relationship patterns so they can find the love they truly deserve. This program is a safe, nurturing environment essential for building self-worth and acquiring the tools to work through challenges and create your best self. We invite you to begin the journey today to start building the new you. Call 407-622-1770 or visit lifecounseling.solutions.com. That's lifecounseling.solutions.com.
Welcome back to Let's Talk About It with Janie Lacy. We are here with our esteemed guest, Dr. Leaf, and she is helping us understand the brain, the mind, our responses, and our thought processes, and all the things we need to do to clean up our mental mess. So right before we took our break, you were sharing with us and explaining to us, and I was just over here. People couldn't see me, but just smiling and just agreeing with everything that you were saying, because I think a lot of times, not only with you breaking everything down, but you also, those that are going to be watching the episode, will see the props and the visualization and to make sense of their own life. But one of the things that I will see as a therapist, and I would want you to help us understand this. And you write about our past memories, how they're physically stored in our brain and our body. And for someone listening or watching, can you break down for us how sharing with us, what exactly does that mean? We hear the trauma, the body keeps the score by Vanderbilt's work and a lot of people's work. How can someone recognize that within themselves, that the memories are stored in their body and that may be cause to their physical sickness?
Great question. And it's a great segue from the past one into this question. So that's a fantastic question. Okay, so we've spoken about these thoughts. So I'm holding up the green tree and the toxic tree that I was for the viewers. And we spoke about how thoughts are real and they're made of memories. And the memories are the root, memories are the source, and the branches are the interpretation of the thing. So this is the interpretation of how you understand the source. So for example, this could be an abuse, and the interpretation is I am shame, I'm useless, I can't form relationships, and that leads to depression, anxiety, etc. The green one would be, this is great information, how can I use this in my life? And then you start using it. So that's just to give you that example. Okay, so now these physical trees, this is what your thoughts look like. And thoughts are the product of mind. Mind being, as we said in the first segment, how you think, feel, and choose, and this gravitational field around your body. So these thoughts with their memories look like trees in the brain. So the brain is one place where they're stored. So I'm going to bring back my model of the body now, and I'm going to just point to the different things here. So the trees in the brain, our thoughts look like trees. In the body, our thoughts go into the DNA of the cells. So cells have got, so in the brain, every entire part of the body, from the brain, every other part of the body, the entire brain and body are made of 37 to 100 trillion cells. We're not quite sure how many, somewhere in that region. Okay. So every single one of your 37 to 100 trillion cells stores every single experience you have. In other words, every thought, because every experience becomes a thought. So you have trillions upon trillions upon trillions of thoughts in your brain as trees, and in the structures of your DNA of your cells. So you have 37 to 100 trillion versions of that toxic tree. That's one tree in your brain of this toxic thought, and you have it in 37 million different places, or 100 trillion, however many cells we've got in our body as well. So it goes literally into the depths. And we all know that a cell has got all the different structures, and your DNA is right kind of in the middle, at the sort of heart of the cell. And it's the chromosomes and the genes and everything. So it's a complicated thing, but that stores it. And that's what we pass through generations as well. That's how things pass through the generations, which is the concept of epigenetics and all kinds of things. So that's why the body keeps the score, because if we've stored it, that means, here's, I've got some muscle showing. There's millions of trillions of cells just in the shoulder muscle. That memory there is also there. It's also there, your throat muscle, in your lung, in your pancreas, in your pancreas, in your digestive system, in every part of your body. There is a representation of this memory, and that's what it means when the body keeps the score, because we store these thoughts in three places. Number one, brain is trees. Number two, in the DNA in our body, and number three, in the gravitational fields of our mind. So they're trees, they're waves in the gravitational field of the mind, and they're in the DNA of the body. So three different places, which is phenomenal. Yes. So no wonder when you have a trauma and you recall the trauma, what's coming back? First of all, the data comes back, because as you recall it, that's your mind working. So the first, it's kind of like it goes in order. First of all, your mind recalls. So you get that overarching mind, think, feel, choose. You're going to get an overarching overwhelm of all the detail of what's happening, like a big picture immersion in this whole thing. And then it travels immediately to activate the tree, the corresponding tree in the brain. And it's all very fast. It's pretty instantaneous. And then that brings up detail. Then you start getting all the different memories being activated, and these the different types of memories that are activated in the branches and then the roots, and then the body gets activated, and that's when the physical sensations start coming back. And that's when you start feeling like, it's very strange. Like, you can have a child who's maybe, let's say, 8 years old, and they get bullied, and they get bullied maybe repeatedly at a new school. They go, let's just create a scenario. You go to a new school and you're not accepted. This is such a common scenario. And you're 8 years old, you're in your new school, you're feeling a kind of a little bit fluey that first day, and you get bullied. The next day you get bullied, and this flu kind of is pretty bad that week, and the bullying's pretty bad. The bullying carries on, the flu goes away, but the memory's been established. So now it kind of gets under control maybe, but you now fast forward and you're 16 years old, and you go to another environment, and something triggers that same, maybe a person looks the same, or maybe another bullying experience occurs, but you never dealt with this, you never had an opportunity. So this then, it is triggered from the unconscious mind, and the fear that this new bullying experience pulls up the old bullying experience, and it pulls it up with all the source, your interpretation, and that means that the mind brings this whole thing up. Then it activates the brain with the detail of the memories, the thoughts, the feelings, the memories of the thought. Sorry, let me say that again. It brings it up with the detail of what you thought, felt, and chose. So the thoughts, the feelings, the choices that happened, and the different types of memories within that, because there's different types. There's factual memories, and then there's the personalization of that memory. So there's the facts of what happened, and then there's the personalization. All of that comes rushing up, and then the sensation of your body comes up, and suddenly you feel fluey, but you've got no flu, but suddenly you feel fluey. And so that comes back up, and now you like flu symptoms, and then also you feel tension in your body. So maybe there's an adrenaline shot, or there's your heart starts palpitating like it's going to pump out of your body, and your face your tongue gets stuck to the top of your mouth, or you feel your shoulders tensing, or all of the above, or whatever. And the HPA axis gets activated. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about the body keeping the score.
Mm-hmm.
So how we manage that, it's actually not that difficult. It's very difficult, but it's not that difficult. It's difficult because it's hard doing trauma work. But if you know the system and the steps, which is what you guide your patients through all the time, but that really helps. What I bring to the table is that I bring the system of, now they come to you for therapy, but they're coming once or twice a week. So what do they do with themselves when they leave you? They've got to live with themselves 24/7 until they see you again. So there has to be a mind management system in place to know what to do as they prepare, live through the week and prepare for the next therapy session. So the system I've developed is not a technique. It's not a new form of therapy. It enhances therapy, definitely doesn't replace therapy. You'll see throughout all my work, I encourage people to go to therapy. Therapy is one of those things that, I practiced myself for 25 years, is one of those things that should never even be, the government should be funding it 100% so that everyone can go to therapy, because everyone needs therapy. And I'm sure you can agree with me. Everyone's got trauma, and there's so many different ways of doing it. Like I was listening to an amazing talk where they were taught there in the UK, they're so advanced. They have like yoga prescriptions, and they have, so you don't just do the yoga together, you actually then go and have a meal together afterwards. And there's there's so much that can be done that's not being done, where money could be channeled into that, not into more drugs that they're trying to make that are going to damage the brain. But that's another whole discussion you and I could probably have for hours. But essentially, to help people on the spot is to understand that's what that means. It's coming back, but you can manage that, and that's the beauty. Once you understand the system, then you can manage the system.
Absolutely. And I love that some of the schools in the UK are now incorporating meditation as part of the school day. Just so many advances.
Yes.
It's awesome. But you've also talked about, because since we're talking about just the toxic stuff, I think a lot of people can relate to this or can glean from your wisdom and all your years of experience. So if someone's listening or they're watching us and they want to know, how do they deal with their toxic memories? Okay, so they know that they're toxic. They know that they have all of this stuff. And they get triggered by that. So from their experiences and the thoughts. So how can they stay calm and cope in the moments that they are triggered by these memories and experiences? And I know you've given us some steps and some things in your book. So what can you share with someone that's listening and they're not familiar with your work, but they said that this is something that they relate to and they want to start working immediately on themselves?
Okay, so that's a really good question too. So our mind is always with us, as I've mentioned. You wake up with your mind, you eat with your mind, you dress with your mind, you talk with your mind, you're listening now with your mind, you go to sleep with your mind, you have dreams with your mind. So your mind never stops. So whether you are 2 years old, 1 year old, a baby, and 90s, your mind is still going. So mind management is absolutely key as a human, and it's not addressed sufficiently. So that's the core of my work, is teaching you mind management. So that's the basic principle involved. So mind management's like your overarching what you should be doing all the time, and then you can go deeper in therapeutic situations to actually manage what comes up in your day-to-day management of your mind. So there's different levels that we're working on. Okay, so that's kind of the overarching principle. Then when in terms of how to understand, now I've described all the stuff about these thoughts. So let's say now, okay, so what do? I now understand that that I get triggered, and that trigger then brings this whole thing up in my mind. So I get this whoosh of this memory, then my brain is activated with the tree, so I start getting some details, and then my body responds, and I've got this whole thing hitting me, and it's totally overwhelming. It feels like you're standing under a huge apple tree and you bumped it and all the apples are just like knocking you out, and it's overwhelming. So what do you do? Okay, so what I developed over the years is a concept called the Neurocycle. And the Neurocycle, it's called that now. It's in the book. My book is called Cleaning Up a Mental Mess, the most recent one. We talk about the Neurocycle. I used to call it the 5-step, I see it there, switch on your brain process. And that was this, the Neurocycle was birthed 38 years ago when I started my research. I developed a theory called the Geodesic Information Theory and started doing all the research to test the theory. And it was based on a question that was asked, a question I asked one of my neuroscience lecturers back in the 80s when neuroscience was in its infancy and they didn't believe the brain could change. And I said, but that doesn't make sense, because they spoke about the mind brain. And that what they did correctly then. But they said the brain couldn't change. They said the mind changed, but not the brain. And I said, but that's impossible, because the mind uses the brain. You can't separate the two. The one is using the other. They feedback. And I remember my professor saying, that's a ridiculous question. So I did a TED talk on this. And I said, okay, well, if it's so ridiculous, let me do research on the worst population that you could give me. So what is it? And they said, well, take someone with traumatic brain injury, people that have had very severe trauma to their brain, that they are non-functional or very low functioning. And that's what I did. I worked with people that had been written off as vegetables and that kind of thing. I mean, that's what they used to say. How terrible is that? Doctors used to say in those days, I had so many neurologists that said, oh, they're just vegetables. That's shocking because you should never say that about anyone. But anyway, I would work with people, and some of my early research, I worked with people that had been in coma for very long times and had come around. And one story is of a young girl who, and I'll do this very, very quickly so we can get to the technique, was 16 at the time of her accident, was in a coma for over 2 weeks, had been written off by the neurologist. Parents didn't give up. She came around, got out of her coma, and they contacted me. Honestly, I was very early in my research, very young scientist, just started my practice, still doing research, starting my research, and they said, please, we've heard you working with traumatic brain injury. Can you please help us? And so I worked with them 3 hours a week for 8 months. And when I started working with this young girl, she was functioning at a second grade level. When her accident happened, it was the end of 11th grade. Her goal when I met her was to get back to 12th grade and finish with her peer group, who were like in the first quarter already of their 12th grade year. Now that is a massive order. How do you do in 8 months? How do you go from second grade to 12th grade when you have severe brain damage? It's an impossible task. And so I was told by all her neurologists and all the consultants that I spoke to, except for 2 professors that supported they said, go for it, do it. So I had 2 people supporting me and myself and this family, and we went for it. And I developed a system, which is now the Neurocycle, which was a directed mind technique. Not technique, I hate to use the word technique because there are techniques within it. It's a system. It's how you understand your mind, to use your mind, to directing your mind to change your brain. Okay, and to control, in other words, to direct the neuroplasticity, to direct the changes inside of your brain. So out of that, this young girl using the system for 3 days a week, and then on her own in between, because as I said before, you can go to therapy, but what do you do in between? So she was using it in between on not only her schoolwork to increase and build her brain, but also to detox the trauma that she'd gone through and all the emotional trauma of not being like she was. There's a lot of emotional stuff. So the same system of 5 steps was used to grow the brain and heal the trauma, as well as to detox the traumatic events that had some subsequent events of having the trauma. Within 8 months, this young girl, who was a very average student prior to her accident, so prior to the brain damage, she was pretty average, pretty bad at math. And after the accident, not only within 8 months, she finished school with her peer group, and she finished with flying colors, and she became a math genius. I worked with a team of neuropsychologists who then did various different types of intellectual testing, because IQ is very limited. So we did various different types, and she had gone on to genius level. She was considered a genius, a protege, and went on to get degrees. Now, this is same young girl was considered a vegetable.
Wow.
That motivated me. Then grew up in Zimbabwe and was working in South Africa. So at the time I was working in South Africa in the apartheid system. So the restrictions there, and the socioeconomic, the apartheid, the trauma, I worked in 3 days a week in those areas, and saw the consequence of like the kind of education wasn't even education, the trauma, etc. So I did 3 days a week of work in those areas, as well as running a private practice where the more privileged could afford to come, and working in schools and government and so on. So I did that on purpose to try and get, obviously to help people, but to understand mind from different aspects. So I'm saying all of this to help you understand where these 5 steps come from. They're not some magical trick that you can just do. They're no quick fix. We're in a quick fix era where we want to give me the pill, give me the 5 steps, and boom, I'm fixed in 5 minutes. Not a chance. Okay, this girl worked every day for 8 months, and every patient subsequent. What I learned in my years of research in South Africa, and subsequently, and I worked in Rwanda, war torn Rwanda after the genocide. I worked in, so I've worked in very extreme conditions and worked with people who walked as, sexual trauma, etc., suicide, etc. On top of learning disabilities, Alzheimer's, I've worked on like both angles of and to try and understand the building as well as the detoxing side. So all the systems, and you'll see in the book, I teach you how to use the system to build your brain, which is one of the most powerful mental health resilience systems on the planet that people do not talk about. It's like priority. And you'll see in chapter 14, I have my daily routine, and brain building is essential. You clean your teeth every day, you need to brain build every day. And you breathe all the time, you need a neurocycle all the time. I mean, your mind never stops. Like you never stop breathing, your mind never stops.
Mhm.
So the system is to help you manage your mind all the time. And the system is also to help you do the cleaning of the teeth, which is the more specific, directed, whether it is brain building or whether it's detoxing. We've all got traumas, as you know so well,
Mhm.
in the work you do. And there's different, obviously, degrees of trauma depending on what you've experienced in life. So that's where this history comes from. And over the years, I kept on researching, refining, finding out, okay, if you do this, what's happening in the brain? What is the
Mhm.
science of thought? How does this thought build? Like I told you, this detail of how thought builds. How can I use that knowledge to then find these and become a thought detective, like Sherlock Holmes, and find out what are the clues, what is the source, what happened, what really happened. And then now that I know what happened, that awareness alone is not enough. I have to go beyond that. I have to go beyond into, okay, I have to reconstruct. I have to reconceptualize. Otherwise, this controls me. I have to make this now. It's happened. I can't forget. I can forgive. It's part of the techniques. Forgiveness is a technique, but it's you can't. I now have to reconstruct. So, like you buy an old house and you decide to renovate, and you find this ugly old house. You know that funny sign that's up, uglyhouses.com. Ugly oldhouses.com always makes me laugh, but it always is a good analogy. You buy an ugly old house and you take photos and of all the mold and the ugly carpets and the darkness and the cupboards that are falling, whatever, and then you bash that down and you build a beautiful new space. So it's deconstruction, reconstruction. That's what you do here. That is you as a thought detective, you use the 5 steps to go from the signals, the cues, to the origin story, and in that process you deconstruct it. So you are embracing, processing, and reconceptualizing through deconstructing and reconstructing. And then, so in other words, you take your story and you make it work for you. So if, for those of you that are listening, I'm holding up the green tree and I'm holding it into the camera and face down. And what you'll see is there's light colored leaves and dark colored leaves. Like there's a light colored leaf and there's darker ones in the back. Now that's for a reason. When you reconstruct or reconceptualize, you're not just saying X plus Y equals Z. You're not just sticking a Z band-aid on the XY issue. X is what happened, Y is what you would like to have happened, and XY is how you make sense of that and how you're going to make it play out your future. So I'm not just going to do Z and just slap an affirmation, a drug, a label, onto this on the toxic one, chop the head off the weed, it's going to regrow. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to Z it. I'm going to XY it, which means I'm going to X, Y. X is the light colors, Y is the dark. So X is what happened. But now I've put it into the green tree. I've reconstructed it. This takes time. It takes cycles of 21 days. And I'll talk about the time in a moment. I'm reconstructing into the healthy. The healthy is the dark green. That's how I want it to play out into my future. I want to be able to have a relationship. I want to be able to not get triggered by that and fall apart every time that particular trigger occurs in my life. I want to be able to go into that meeting and not fall into a panic every time, whatever. I want to not live with constant hovering anxiety. I don't want to keep ruminating. I don't want to keep overgeneralizing. I don't want to keep having imposter syndrome as a dominant force in my life, etc., etc. So that's what I want to be free of. So this is the story that's kept me there, but now I've taken control back. I have reconceptualized. So this is just at the tip. This is the core of who I am, the dark ones. And this is now how I'm now going to make this play out into my future. And so that process of identifying, embracing, processing, and reconceptualizing from that into this, where I take the energy, because this is a physical thing. This is a physical thing. This was there first. I'm going to grow this. These physical things have got energy. So as you, we know that if chemical equations release energy, we know that from basic science, energy is never lost, it's converted. So as I become aware of this, as soon as neuroscience shows us that as soon as we're aware of something, you weaken it in your brain. So the protein branches become weaker. As soon as I'm aware, I weaken these protein branches, I weaken the wave in the field, and I weaken the DNA control in my body. I start activating different switches. So I'm doing 3 things. So that awareness is giving me power. I'm now controlling. I'm no longer under the apple tree being hit by the apples. I'm standing back and I'm observing the tree, and I'm controlling how I want to reconstruct this tree. There's no condemnation, no guilt, no shame, because all of those are just useful messengers. They're not me. They're not an it. They're not a disease. They're simply telling me something. See, there's a whole shift in perspective. So that's what, to do that takes 21 days at least. So what I've shown from my research is, and this is not 21 days to build a habit, that's a complete myth, and I talk about that in the book too. It takes 21 days to get what we call gamma peaks in the brain, which is the neuroplastic changes, which means this thing's going to lose energy and I'm going to now grow something new. And as I deconstruct this and it gets weaker and weaker and weaker, I now rebuild it into this. I transfer the energy to this. So that happens, takes about 21 days. And then after 21 days, this is there, but it's small. Now, here's a tremendous key. And I know one of your questions you're going to ask me is about, people get stuck and they feel like they've tried and nothing's worked and that kind of thing. And they get emotionally stuck and they're going round and round in circles. Well, this little new reconstructed tree, the work's been done, but you're not finished. Most people stop here. Most people don't even get here. I have to tell you, most people get to between day 4 and day 14. Most people get to that and then they tend to go back and start all over again. So they don't progress forward. And it's so frustrating. That creates tremendous emotional stuckness and rumination. So this teaches you to progress forward and go beyond rumination. So essentially what happens is that from day 22 to 63, it takes a full 9 weeks. So we need 3 cycles of 21. The first 21 does this, takes this away and builds this. The second 42 make this strong. Whatever you think about the most grows. So as you practice, you're giving this more and more energy. Remember, there's trillions and trillions of thoughts in your mind. So you've been building thoughts, which are experiences as a result of mind in action from a certain point in the womb. So there's trillions in this forest. Imagine your mind being this infinite forest and you flying above it in a helicopter and you're just looking at this forest that just never ends. Okay. So this has got to compete with all the other thoughts. It's got to get from the non-conscious mind, which is active 24/7, NON, not subconscious, not unconscious. Unconscious is when we knocked out. Subconscious is the bridge between the conscious mind and the non-conscious. The non-conscious is also another unspoken of and misunderstood area. The non-conscious is where everything about you, every experience, all your belief systems, everything you've ever experienced is in thought trees, in the waves of your mind, in the trees of your brain, and in the DNA of your body. That's the non-conscious. Operates 24/7, operates at 10 to the 27, which means at 400 billion actions per second. It's beyond space and time. So it's brilliant, and it's your brilliance. And at the core of this non-conscious is your wise mind. So all of us have this wise mind. And there's also in the non-conscious, the messy mind. The conscious mind is awake when you're awake. Only. So the conscious mind's only working when you're awake. The non-conscious mind, NON, is working 24/7. So the non-conscious, think of as this ongoing, constant action, brilliant, always going where all of our thought trees and waves and DNA stuff is all happening. Conscious mind is our active interaction with life when you're awake. And that's only awake when you're awake. The subconscious is the bridge between the two. Now, the more we mind manage through the neurocycles, through the system of mind management, the more you mind manage, the more you get your non-conscious to talk to your conscious. So you get your conscious mind to listen to the non-conscious, and the non-conscious sends messages through the subconscious. So it's those little tip of the tongue, those little prompts, those little, okay, so we want to listen, but we're very busy and we don't listen, and we just, we get reactive instead of responsive. Responsive means we really tune in, introspect, listen, dig deep, and that takes time, and that's what you're teaching your patients to do in psychotherapies, to really listen and tune in and so on. And then only can you start fixing. So we've all got, if you think of this huge forest, we've all got the strip through the middle of our forest, which is this perfect strip, these green trees that are just beautiful. On the outside are all these other green trees that are kind of messy, and then in between there's these toxic trees, which are all the toxic experiences. But the inside is a wise mind. The outside is the messy mind. So we have a wise mind and a messy mind, which brings us full circle back to the title of my book, Cleaning Up the Mental Mess. Our messy mind is beautiful. It's not a bad thing. It's an experimental mind. It is it's the first line of defense. Think of an army. You have your foot soldiers that go out first. That's what your messy mind is. It goes out first. It tends to be very experimental. So it makes a ton of mistakes, but that's okay. That's how you learn. So messiness is not something to be frightened of. Messiness is something to embrace so that you can repair and grow. So if you have the argument, embrace it so you can repair and grow. Don't go into guilt, shame, and condemnation. If you're a mom, I'm a mom of 4, and you're a mom, I'm sure, as well. And the guilt that goes into parenting, don't let that guilt keep you back. Let that guilt prompt you to say, okay, I made a mess. How can I repair? How can I grow? So that's the philosophy that we want to adopt in this whole thing, is that yes, this is normal human response. We're going to make a mess because our messy mind is out there. The wise mind is always there, but we've got to train our messy mind to work with a wise mind. So our wired for love nature is the messy mind working with the wise mind. And when the messy mind works with the wise mind, we become intuitive and introspective. When we end response and we become responders, first responders versus reactors. Reactors are triggered and just jump in and make things worse and more anxiety and all that stuff. So this is essentially what the system is going to help you do. It's going to help you get this whole thing under control. So when we talk about using the 5 steps, we are talking about you going into your messy mind and wise mind together. And imagine being a pilot and you're flying a helicopter or whatever. The messy mind is the pilot, the wise mind is the co-pilot, because the co-pilot's giving advice, watching what's coming up, has got the advantage of seeing what's going on. The messy mind's actually doing the flying, first offense. So the two together, you always two together. You want to train your ability to cooperate between the two. Most of us are very driven by the messy mind. We need to train ourselves to listen to the wise mind. And that's what the neurocycle will do. If you learn to play the violin or learn to become a pro athlete, it doesn't happen overnight. So learning the neurocycle trains over time, teaches you how to do this. Anyway, so you land the plane and you get out. So instead of, so what you do is here's the depression, here's the anxiety, and you now respond to that signal. That's a cue, that's a clue. And so instead of flying over, which is forgetting, and saying, oh, forgiven, and you flying over and I'll ignore that or whatever, you actually say, listen to the co-pilot that says, hey, you know what, you got to deal with this, land the plane. So you land the plane, you step out, you don't go stand under the tree, let the apples hit you stand back and you look at the tree and you with your co-pilot. So now you go into multiple perspective advantage. I call it the MPA. It's in the book as well. All this is in the book in detail. And you now start observing the situation. And this is in your 15 to 45 minute session that you do every day for 21 days. And so you're going to work through these 5 steps. Step 1, land the plane and accept with absolute embracing. Embracing means bring it to your fold. There's no judgment, there's no guilt, there's no shame. You're a human. You've responded to adverse circumstances. You're responding to the clue, warning signal of depression. It's a great thing to respond to. Depression is not scary. Depression is a messenger. When you do that, you can embrace it. So that's your philosophy coming in. And then you start working through the 5 steps. And basically, they're in detail in the book, but essentially you start gathering awareness, you start reflecting, which is the second step. You do 2 steps of writing, and then you do an action step. And those steps have been meticulously worked out that as you do them, you bring the 2 sides of the brain together, you increase blood flow and oxygen in the front of your brain, which drops impulsivity, increases responsiveness and decision making. You get the different parts of your brain to connect, you get more integrated, so you can build. There's a million different things that happen, which I explain. And in the long run, you can actually completely transform how you function. So I'll just end that little session off by showing you another image in the book. And you've seen this image because you've got the book. For those of you that can't see, I'm holding up the page in the book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. It's a page that's got head maps. And this is using the QEEG and it's looking inside the brain at the energy response in the brain to person thinking. This is a case study in my most recent clinical trials. And very simplistically, there's 3 rows of head maps. And the first row is blue and the second 2 rows are gray. Okay, so very simple. The first row is day 1. The second row is day 21. The third row is day 63. It takes 63 days to change a behavior, to build a habit and change a behavior, not 21 like we've been told. It takes at least 3 cycles. In 21, you'll build, as I said, you'll get gamma peaks, but it takes a full 63 to actually create a habit that will then change the behavior. So that feeling of stuckness will be stuck until day 63. And you'll feel stuck if you just stop at day 21. You're going to be very frustrated because you're going to say, I know what to do, but I'm not doing it. So this is how you get to that other point. So for the first 21 days, you do the 5 steps each day for 15 to 45 minutes. This is the dedicated brushing your teeth time if you want to use it that way. Then the next 42 days, you just do step 5. And it takes you 1 to 7 minutes, which is not long at all, to literally transform your behaviors. There's no prescription in terms of if you have X trauma, how many cycles. But honestly, the trauma is huge. There's a good chance you might do multiple cycles of 63 days. I've had patients work for a whole year. in 63-day cycles on the same toxic tree, but in the first cycle they maybe found this much, and then this on the next one, and this on the next one. Don't be hard on yourself. Be kind to yourself. Give yourself the time. And this is where therapy is so vital, because as you do the work, then you can unpack and get guidance and perspective in therapy and help with the emotional decompression that is needed in something like this. So that's kind of the overarching. I've said a lot. I don't know if you want to ask more questions, more specific.
Well, we are at the end of our show, and we are so appreciative, Dr. Leaf, because, I think a lot of time, a light bulb is going to come on, and you said something that was pivotal, and it's not 21 days, it's 63 days, and you talk about the cycle, but you have to get the book to really clean up your mental mess, to really understand those steps. But I think a lot of people will get unstuck by hearing that. Not 21 days, it's a lot longer in that. But as we end another episode of Let's Talk About It with Janie Lacy, where can people buy your book, or where can people follow you if they want to remain in touch with you?
Absolutely. Well, all my social media handles, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc., are Dr. Caroline Leaf. So it's super easy. And obviously from Instagram, you can get to everything. My webpage is drleaf.com. The book's available wherever books are sold. And also on our site, we have a store, so drleaf.com. So I know sometimes Amazon constantly seems to run out of them, but it is available on Amazon, wherever books are sold globally. And I have a podcast called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, which is also got lots of advice, and that's about it. So there's lots of things on there.
Absolutely. So if you want to learn, there's lots of resources, her podcast, her book, and many other books. So go to Amazon, follow her on Instagram. And we are so appreciative of your time and gleaming from all of your experience and resources. And hopefully the goal is that someone was impacted by hearing your message today. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. I also actually, Janie, have an app called the Neurocycle app, which is available on Google and iTunes as well, which helps people in. It's like me giving them therapy. So that also helps too.
Well, you heard that. She has an app. So go look and download the app today. So in the words of our esteemed guest, how you use your mind to manage is incredibly important. It's in the foundation of a happy and healthy life. So until next time, this is your host, Dr. Janie Lacy.
Thank you for tuning in. Let's Talk About It can be heard live every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific Time and 8 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Empowerment Channel. Please join your host, Dr. Janie Lacy, for another edition of the show next week.